Hello, ladies and gentlemen. This is Professor Hamamoto. It is March 22nd, year 2022, 3:01 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. And ladies and gentlemen, for the benefit of those of you in the live stream, what you just viewed is known in the business as a cold open. Cold open. That is, we go right into the action. With you've seen this in some of the monologues on Saturday Night Live, some of the later ones. So I thought I'd just experiment with this, and also as a reward to you here in the live stream, because who knows, I might get a takedown notice for that little clip there. Obviously, that's not original with me. I took it from a film that I'm studying very, very carefully. But it is relevant. Hopefully, it'll replay, but it is relevant to today's talk about V.C. Andrews. And it's relevant to men in particular. Just because I mentioned V.C. Andrews, we're not talking about chick flicks here. We're not just because most of these books have been adapted to Lifetime. Is it Lifetime? Yeah, Lifetime cable channel, which is typically material adaptations or sometimes originals for the female market. But this has to do with humanity in general. Yes, we're talking about V.C. Andrews, okay? There's a level of profundity there that is not fully understood either by the mass audience and definitely by the literary, interpretive, theory audience, the people who supposedly are experts in literature or in cultural expression. The whole V.C. Andrews phenomenon has passed right over their head. So I see an opportunity there for me and for you to dig in, or at least raise some questions that hopefully will initiate a new pathway, a new point of entry to understand not just V.C. Andrews as such, but to understand the world that V.C. Andrews, and I use her name in quotation marks, right, air quotes. I use her name in quotation because we really don't know. We, meaning myself and the larger public, don't really know who V.C. Andrews is, and I'm only going to be able to touch upon it today because I don't have a very good fix on that yet. But that's part of our challenge beyond this little live cast here. Hopefully, it'll have that. If you pass it on and word of mouth, have people check it out here, and I know it's going to resonate with potentially this talk here. It's going to resonate with potentially millions of people all around the world, not just in the English speaking world, because her work is heavily, when I say her, it's also a he, because we know that Andrew Niederman took over after a certain point, and we'll address that point at a certain time of this talk. I'm not going to really dwell on it. I don't think it's important, except for the fact that it was Niederman himself, the person who took the reins over from V.C. Andrews, who has come out with the first book-length biography of V.C. Andrews. Of course, I have to read it because I've been teasing you for the last year and 2 months that, yeah, I'm going to go in on V.C. Andrews one day. I'm just waiting for some biographical information that I can sink my teeth into. So the time has come. And I've been very careful over the past, since I got this book, it's about 2 weeks ago, in taking my time with it and gathering my thoughts, because there's a tendency to run away with the obvious, going an obvious door. Oh, yeah, it's about child abuse, and it says, and I'll just read you all the citations about incest, all the social science, all the behavioral science. Yeah, that exists, and I have that literature, and I read it. I'm not saying I'm an expert or have mastered it, but I wanted to develop some deeper insights that originate not just because it's me, but deeper insights that I think even these so-called experts, whether they be literary, psychology, psychiatric, sociological, literary theory type people, I think I have a much deeper understanding of what V.C. Andrews represents today, and I'm sharing it with you today here all the way live. So welcome to this really, really important live cast. And Well, there's Michael Char. I'm just trying to see how many men showed up. Raphael, I assume you, yes, konnichiwa. I assume you are male or identify as male because there's a lot of gender policing these days. And that's one of the reasons why this particular talk is so important because I'm going to fight back at it with using the blunt edge of the sword. I don't know if you watch very carefully in the scene, you might have to watch it a second time. But when that guy defeated that one opponent of his, he used the blunt side of the sword. He didn't cut him. He used the blunt side purposely just to humiliate him, just to take him down. And the second time he did it with the same slash, but he hit him and he dropped. So I use that as a technique that we can use ourselves. We don't really have to use the sharp end of the blade on our opponents. We could use the blunt end, like if you call it, there's a technical term. Every single part of the sword, katana, has a nomenclature attached to it because it's a craft, it's a spiritual endeavor, and it's the people who study it will know what I'm talking about. But we can use the blunt side of the sword, the upward curve of it, to take down our opponents and humiliate them and make sure that they'll never again challenge us as a species. Because that's what that film's about, by the way. It's called seppuku, or as they say in America, Harry Carey, right? Or whatever, the world's oldest fanboy, Quentin Tarantino, right? He watched all these movies, not that one, but he was a video store clerk, and he was plucked out of obscurity in order to make all these whack movies about Asia and supposed Asian martial arts and put women in these martial arts position and all that. Right? When I say plucked out of obscurity, this is what happened to VC Andrews. She's again another example of these losers who are plucked out of obscurity and put up to the front and held up these cultural icons. And if there's enough backstory and legend and build up and hype, right? It's all about advertising because we're talking about publishing, movies, and all that. It's about advertising, marketing. If you put enough back there, you can make someone like Oprah Winfrey into like emperor, goddess, queen Oprah, right? Build her up. And we know that's an effective strategy. We've seen it time and time again. It's what really has driven up to this point the celebrity culture. And that itself is beginning to fragment and fray. It's going to crumble. And the people who were built up are also going to be part of the build down. You will be part of the rubble. So come clean now. Tell us what you've learned, Whoopi Goldberg, Quentin Tarantino, Richard Rodriguez, whoever's else out there, your Jesse Smollett type people. Tell us right now, start a YouTube channel, come clean, or contact me. I'll put you on air in a live cast, and you give us the entire saga of how you came to celebrity, how you came to pass, right? And of course, this is true for all the literary, not all, but most of the literary stars that are elevated artificially through the publishing houses, which are intelligence arms. They're part of the larger celebrity hype, news, information, gossip, Harvey Levin, TMZ world, right? Most of them, the music, we know about that. And one of the reasons why someone like a Dave McGowan was put out there is to contain this growing awareness and restrict it to only the Laurel Canyon scene so that we can't understand this form of cultural engineering in its larger, fullest scope. But that having been said, I want to issue a caveat not to view everything in that same, it's all a psyop lens, because we're hearing that as well. I want to caution us against that because occasionally people slip through organically. I'm an example of that, I believe. Not that I'm a superstar or anything, but I managed to, because they misidentified me. They thought I was one of them. See, that's what happens, right? I have all the credentials for it. I have all the markers that said, oh, he's one of us. And they just assume that if you're at the party, not the mansion party, that comes later. If you're at the party, if it's a reception, if you're at a certain degree level, then you're part of the scheme. But it doesn't always work that way. So Whoopi Goldberg, there's some hope for you because I saw you were narrating a really good documentary on, I guess it was Amazon Prime. Yes, I'm a subscriber. And again, I don't want to err and say, yeah, don't watch Netflix, boycott Amazon. That's really stupid, lazy, boneheaded, reactionary type response that the other side wants. I say consume it all and look, but consume it with a critical eye because Whoopi Goldberg did a great job in narrating a 4-part series directed by Oliver Stone, the great director, right? JFK, remember that one? And I know some people have problems with him, but let's set that aside for a moment. But she did a really good job, along with Donald Sutherland, in narrating a 4-part first season of JFK Destiny Betrayed, which is an adaptation of the Jim DiEugenio book, really good book. And by the way, if anybody has contact with Jim DiEugenio, please give him my information. Tell him I'd like to have him on this show so we can discuss this book, Destiny Betrayed. I also wanted to ask him some questions about what it's like adapting his research, his written research, his published research for documentaries and working with directors like Oliver Stone, which is primarily, we're talking about the visual media, right? So please, if you know, and I had some good luck by making these requests of the audience. This is how Kirby Summers came here, and I think it was Jamie Lee as well, and other people, because they're not always that easy to find. At least I don't have the tools to really search some of these people down. So, another one is Leo Zagami. Someone mentioned that because I do look at your suggestions. Some of them I just dismiss because I don't think these people are worthy of carrying my jockstrap, let alone having on my show. But Leo Zagami is definitely another person that I would like to, because I've read all his books, including the most recent one, and want to talk about the craft of writing, not so much the contents of the book, because you can read it. I want you to, but I want to talk about the whole writerly enterprise. And that is the topic of today's topic, the V.C. Andrews enterprise, because a lot of you have read the books. Most of you know the plot lines and all the characters and the subplots better than I ever will. However, that's only a starting point for me. I am more interested in what's behind the narrative storyline, right? That's what you get on CNN and even independent news. They're a bunch of headline chasers. We know the story. How many times are we going to call Jen Psaki a stupid ragamuffin? How many times are we going to laugh at Anthony Fauci? How many times are we going to drive down like that great geopolitical analyst Owen Schroyer down the street with a megaphone in an armored car baiting libtards or whatever names that you have? How many times are we going to do that? Is not critical thinking. That's distraction. That's feeding right into the system that's set up for these supposed controlled opposition people who all they can come up with is name calling, right? And I'm just saying that for any tourists who are here, this is not your channel. Go watch Owen Schroyer, go watch Jay Dyer or Henry Macau, the Canadian dude, because I've been compared to him and I'm really insulted by that. Just because he has a PhD doesn't make him anything. All right. He just finds out what's in the zeitgeist and he writes about it. He's got a really, more power to him. He's got a really nice business model. Great. I'm just mentioning because that's not what I'm doing here. Just because I'm talking about V.C. Andrews, one of the top selling novelists. I didn't say popular novelists, novelist, period, in the English language. All right. Thank you. That's enough for disclaimer land. Now, one of the reasons why I put that cold opening there is because we're talking about V.C. Andrews, but we're talking about an incest power political complex that requires both male and female elements, male and female. And the elite in society. I'm not talking about the celebrities, Nicole Kidman and Sarah Bullock and Diane Wiest or Cher. They're all in that movie, right? About witches. Because when we're talking about witches, in fact, at the outset, let me just tell you, I have a really strong suspicion that Virginia Andrews, is a witch. She's a multi-generational witch. Okay. Hopefully I'll get to it. Um, but there's a lot of material here, but I wanted to make that announcement at the top of this little talk here, and I might have to revisit it again, and that's okay too. And I'll draw from your insights. I think this talk here is seminal in the fact that it's going to force people to look at VC Andrews in a much, much more serious light, right? Not that we can't enjoy little trivial, silly, fun type activity. I am one of the biggest consumers of ice cream cones, right? But I'm more interested in the phenomenon of the self-licking ice cream cone, right? That is these systems that seem to perpetuate and to replicate and duplicate and exist through time without any seeming change. The cone is still there and it's licking itself. It's a self-licking ice cream cone. By the way, there's a theoretical article published by someone at the Rand Corporation or MIT or one of these think tanks by that same title, the self-licking ice cream cone. Okay. Why am I mentioning this seemingly off the wall reference? Because the Incest-Power system is a self-licking ice cream cone. I just came up with that now. See, this is the benefit of improvisation. I just started talking about the self-licking ice cream. I realized, oh my gosh, that's really what if you really want to look at it, think about it in an image, right? It's a self-licking ice cream cone, right? This incest power relationship we're talking about here. Improvisation is where it's at, ladies and gentlemen. And I'm saying this also for the dopes who say, uh, Mr. Hamamoto, I'm professor, by the way. I have PhD. I'm a doctor. So do your homework on me. But call me Daryl if you want. If you're friendly to me, I really don't care about the title. But you're a bonehead because you said I need to go online and find out what the difference between C.S. Lewis and Tolkien, right? Yeah, you got the Lord of the Rings confused with, right? Okay, this is not about Googling, right? Googling is not research. Research is not Googling, right? I threw away the sage on the stage model. I go with certain chord progressions and I go off from there. That's the art of improvisation. That's Miles Davis. That's John Coltrane. That's Charlie Parker, right? That's Charlie Christian. That's how I roll. You roll, you're ruled by Wikipedia. I'm not. All right. That's a big difference here. And by the way, I do look at Wikipedia myself. I looked at Wikipedia when I was trying to get all the hard factual information on flowers in the attic, right? There's a whole timeline there that's in Wikipedia, can be very useful for that purpose. But if you want any fresh insights, you're not going to be able to get them online. All you're going to get is even in supposed independent conservative sites, you're just going to get a bunch of name calling. All right, enough about that. So we're talking about the self-referential, self-replenishing. Of course, as you know, incest will mean a genetic decline. And I don't have to dwell on the folklore and the science behind these sort of transgenerational idiocy and moronic and diminished intellectual and physical capabilities of people who inbreed, right? Those stories are well known. And that's only part of the tale. So don't tune out because I'm not letting it rest there with the little name calling about, yeah, they're all a bunch of inbred royalty. No. We know that. And I respect you for knowing that already. And I'm not going to belabor the point that you had a certain a moment in Chinese imperial history where there was so much inbreeding that the court eunuchs took over. Yes, these were boys that had been castrated before they reached, or maybe when they reached puberty, so they would not pose some sort of heterosexual threat to the ruling elite, right? And I use the imperial Chinese court eunuch example for a purpose, because similarly in the 21st century there's a form of chemical castration going on here that the imperial neo-imperial elite today are using, thinking that that's going to help them sustain their power. But if we want to look to history as a teacher, Imperial China fell, and it fell hard. It fell so hard. It was so weak. It allowed all the European powers to come in and take it over and plunder it up until 1949, when they said, okay, let's let this revolution roll so we can use China as the next weapon in the final endgame of the New World Order, right? So the court biochemical eunuchs of today, you're going to go down with the empire. I don't care if you wear high heels, your name is Kolomoisky, or the president of the Ukraine, and you're doing the transgender shtick, or you're a swimmer and win these double NCAA records illegitimately. All the biochemical eunuchs are going down. And people laughed at that. When I used to lecture about a colleague of mine at UC Berkeley, who was the biochemist there, who had done research about how the chemical effluents were, because he studied frogs and the fauna, and saw how all the purposely engineered creatures were becoming not gay, not the gay frogs, but asexual, right? And that was kind of a run up to what's going now here. It's formalized in the university curriculum. All the people who are in the mental health field, whether they're in or out of the university, are on board with the post-gender reality, social reality, to create biochemical court eunuchs, right? Now, why are they doing this? I'm talking about the ruling class. I'm not talking about Whoopi Goldberg. I'm talking about Joe Biden even. I'm talking about the real oligarchs that run, that you don't even see them in the popular media. And yeah, there's the usual suspects, Rothschild, but there's so many other. You don't even know about the Khans, the KAHN. You don't know about the Lees. You're looking at the Europeans, but how about the other groups as well? And I think some of the oligarchs that we need to really look are in East Asia. And I'm not talking about China. I'm talking about South Korea, who's ostensibly an ally of us. I think that's where you're going to see a lot of action if I have anything to do with it. I've already wrote a book called The Servitors of Empire, and it's come out of Asia world, ladies and gentlemen. But I'm getting ahead of myself. So what does the ruling class get out of this? First of all, you know this part, right? It eliminates competition from the physically fit, from the mentally fit, the intellectually fit opposition, right? Just because, you know, we have the historic example in Japanese civilization where the warrior class, they were hired. They're mercenaries for the imperial court so that they can steal from each other. And then after a while, and that class is called samurai. Okay, the society was structured along 4 different levels. And the farmers, by the way, were at the top because they were productive, right? But they're also the most exploited. But the point is that the samurai class eventually figured out, hey, we don't need the loyalty, and we can intimidate the farmers, and they'll give us all the rice we need, and then we'll build up our system right here. You know, the feudal system of Japan, right? The Tokugawa period, 250 years. This is where you see it consolidate. And of course, you know that empire fell eventually. It fell because they thought, hey, we've managed to consolidate our power, and this is how it's going to be for into eternity. This is going to be the 1,000-year Reich. You've seen it happen over and over again in different societies. And now we have a biochemical Reich that's being put onto us right now. But we are going to study history, world history, comparative history, not just European, Western European, but all the globe. That's my training. My training is in comparative culture. That was where I got my doctorate. Not literature like Henry Mankow. which, that's okay. That's fine. But I have a different lens that I'm looking at, right? So it eliminates this type of competition. We're seeing the fruits of that with the recent NCAA. And then you got Owen Schroyer, the great geopolitical mind, driving through downtown Austin with his girlfriend, Hernandez, with the megaphone, making fun of the new champion of the freestyle record holder, who's a man genetically. And that's supposed to solve our problems, right? It's like an immediate gratification deal. Okay, so we know that part. But more importantly, what the bio eunuch population, which will be most of us, by the way, if the people like Robert Malone, Dr. Malone, mRNA, that scam artist, people can see, we laughing at Tony Fauci. He's pretty obvious, right? But while we're laughing away, we got Robert Malone, and most people, oh yeah, Fauci bad, Malone good. And then that's how he gets over on us. You dig what I'm saying here? So this type of outlook that I'm forwarding or advancing here is indispensable to understanding all sorts of phenomena so that we won't be fooled again, right? You know that song, Meet the New Boss, Same as the Old Boss, by that great poet, Pete Townsend? Yes, you know the song. If you don't, check it out and listen to it. So what this does is to not just put the physically and the mentally fit out, right? It also reduces, they think, the top level think it reduces or eliminates the intra-familial rivalries, right? These different houses, the House of Orange, the House of Saxe-Coburn, the House of Lee, and you name it, right? These imperial houses still live on, post-imperial houses, these bloodlines, as we've called them before. They think they're going to eliminate any sort of because that's what really ruins. It's not us that takes them down. It's their own inbreeding and their own competition. I call it the Yojimbo approach, right? Lay out all the artifice and all the betrayal within that group and let them kill each other. Let them self-neutralize. That comes again from Japanese cinema, which I'm a student of since I was a little boy, and understand the world through that lens, because the Japanese people traditional societies have already gone through what America is only going through now. They lived through it over centuries, right? That's why the British people, English in particular, of ethnicities, are very, very adept at it, because they've been through this for centuries. They have a head start on us. But we can play catch up by watching their films, reading their literature. I'm reading all the Gothic literature, I'm telling you. I'm getting the Penguin editions, the Oxford University Press editions of all the classics of English and early American Gothic literature. And V.C. Andrews fits in that mold, but she's foregrounding the element of incest as what I call the self-licking ice cream cone of political economic power amongst the elite. Because the early Gothic literature had a lot of incest as well, like Melmoth the Warrior, right? Anne Radcliffe, people who are writing in as early as the late 18th century were already talking about these themes. V.C. Andrews is on that arc. She's at the final end of an arc, a couple of centuries old, of this post-gender, intra-familial, post-gender cryptopolitics that's predicated upon inbreeding or incest power, as I call it, for lack of a better term. I'm going to stick with incest/power. Okay, what's a recent example of this? And again, I'm not going to go through the same, I'm not Don Bengino or Stu the Auctioneer Peters or Cherry Boy, what's his name, Ben Shapiro, and say, oh yeah, Hunter Biden. And that, as soon as I mentioned Hunter Biden, everybody's supposed to break out in laughter, right? But that's an example of this intra-familial incest with his cousin, who has accused Hunter Biden publicly of molesting her. And then we know about the laptop. So I'm not going to insult your intelligence. Most people are reading the headlines. So I'm not making a career out of chasing the headlines because you're doing it already. I'm going in deep. And you know he's a pass-through for bribery. You know he's not a real artist, so I don't have to belabor that, okay? But there is a example, in case you missed the point, of what V.C. Andrews, quote unquote, whoever she or he was, or it was, it might even have been an AI. I never thought about that. Just like I'm pretty sure Thomas Pynchon is an AI construct, right? The great literary figure who no one's ever seen, right? Is a maybe the original short stories were Pynchon, but later on, once you get big, and this happened to V.C. Andrews, they'll come in and they'll take you over, right? Just like recently they've been taking over all the intellectual property of all the great songwriters. Say, okay, you've had your run, you signed the contract. It doesn't even have to do with Satan either. You know, Bob Dylan didn't have to sell his soul. All they have to do is make an unsigned agreement, a gentleman's agreement, or a contract to say, okay, I'll be the voice of a generation until they die, which is, you know, the baby boomers, right? I'll be the voice of the generation. In exchange, you get to have my catalog when I'm about to split this earth. By the way, Dylan has a new book coming out. I have it on pre-order with the retailer that ate the world. I'll be the first one to get it when it drops. But beforehand, if anybody is with one of those big time, big shot, white shoe publishers, I don't know which one it is. It's probably the biggie, though. Please let me know. I want to get in touch with Bob Dylan. I want to have him on this show here to talk about his new book. He is a good writer if it is his writing, but I've read the chronicles and I enjoy his writing. And his new book is going to be all these great, it's going to be about songwriting, the songwriters that he likes, and he is a good songwriter. Okay, so next point here. I'm already halfway into this, blown this time here, burned it up here. So I was going to go through the Incest-Power in comparative perspective, you know, doing a quick survey, but this audience here is quality. So you know about Egyptian brother and sister, the Egyptian dynasty. Right? Those people don't exist anymore. The Egyptians we see today are different genetically from the ones that we read about in the storybooks. But they were very much based upon brother and sister incest or cousin incest. Down. They thought they were going to be forever, right? We talked about Ozymandias, right? Percy Bysshe Shelley, his poem about how they just kind of faded away into the sand. And then of course, the British Empire thought they were the successors to this, right? But what are they guilty of? They're guilty of multi-transgenerational incest. That's one of the reasons why they had to bring in Diana Spencer to have her mate with Prince, not my Prince, not Prince the actor or the musician, but their Prince, because I'm not ruled by any man or woman or entity. I'm a free, sovereign, God, you know, natural law, human being entity. So that Prince Charles, they had to do it because the reptilian genetics were starting to express themselves a little bit too obviously, right? That recessive chin, right? Michael Caine, the great actor, British actor, one of my favorites. I think I've seen almost every single one of his films, and I've read his books about acting, how to act, or what actors do. Very useful, not just because I have no aspirations to be an actor, but I'm interested in the craft, the art of what people do who pursue very specialized tasks. But he referred to them as chinless wonders, right? And that brings me to my next point, right? Egyptian dynasties, you got the European royalty, and you have your Habsburg chin, right? The House of Habsburg, that's that inbred bloodline. And if you go to Castillo Chapultepec, this is in the Distrito Federal, Mexico City. I recommend everybody. That's one of the finest cities in the world. Forget about all the propaganda you're hearing and all the narco terrorists shooting up everybody and squalor and third world poverty and prostitution and kidnap. Yes, that happens everywhere. That happens in my city. So go to the Distrito Federal. Again, it's a district, just like Washington, D.C. is a district, just like Tokyo is a district, just like City of London is not part of the country. Same with Distrito Federal, Mexico City. But if you go there, you go to Chapultepec castle, you'll see a whole portrait gallery of when Mexico was run by the Habsburgs. And by the way, when the United States falls, if it does, you and me, that's not going to happen on our watch, right? It's going to happen to the next generation of biochemically castrated human beings, right? The bio eunuchs that are now being engineered, but it's not going to happen. They're waiting for us to die, and they're trying to hasten it with you know what, right? But the Habsburg gallery, portrait gallery in Chapultepec, and I was there, and I was just, I was just staring at it and looking at it, taking notes, and trying to assimilate that. But all these pictures, this is before photography, right? Going back, to the late 16th century, because there were Habsburgs going way back, right? They were all up there, and they all looked like dogs. Their tongues were lolling, and you couldn't see the spittle, but you can imagine what the portraitist was. It was all oils, right? We're seeing, and they looked monstrous because of the Habsburg. This is well known fact right there. All right, but I'm talking about Western Europe, and my contribution to New World Order theories. I'm bringing in the Asian American and the Asia element, because we're talking about the world, right? The world is, half of it, at least, in Asia. So in Asian royalty, you see this in the Imperial House of Japan, a lot of inbreeding, and you see this inbreeding. I'm only pick two for now, Korea and Japan. And by the way, Korea and Japan have inbred amongst each other for power to consolidate. But I mention that because there's this fake tension. And by the way, I've borne the brunt of it amongst my Korean American colleagues in the academic world. They think I'm related to Hirohito because they've been so propagandized to think we're two different people. We're not. The Koreans and the Japanese, and I'm not fully Japanese either. I'm also Okinawan, which is a different bloodline there. That's the mystical, metaphysical part of my reality. But if you look in the history, you see that the royal houses were all intermarried in a very similar way that you have the Habsburg of Saxe-Coburg, and the Khans, I'm sure, were pretty much incestuous. You have it even in Hawaii. And by the way, the royalty was incestuous until the Christian missionaries went. I'm not saying the Christian missionary conquest of the islands before the military took it over is good. I'm just saying that the missionaries said, no, this is not acceptable. You're not going to do this anymore. And they stopped. They were already decadent by that time. By the time the Christian missionaries showed up, Protestant mostly, and by the way, most of those Protestant missionaries, their children went to Yale. That's why you'll see a lot of people, or Harvard, you'll see a lot of these people in the publishing business or high-level servitors of empire for the Protestant elite in the society. A lot of them grew up in Hawaii. They go to Punahou, right? Punahou from Barack Obama, or back then he was known as Barry Soetoro, right? But he went to Harvard. He didn't go to Yale. He went to Harvard instead. But he was on that track. So those were the child of the missionaries that through Hawaii. And of course, they took it over by degrading their culture through sexuality. So you're not going to have official brother and sister sex, but we're going to give you everything else, right? And we're going to have photographs to prove it. Now, this is before the age of, maybe it was age of photography is already in. So let's go to V.C. Andrews, what you've all been waiting for. Incest as a literary premise, right? Because in the early Gothic novels, right, Anne Radcliffe and some of these other ones who slip my mind right now, right? By the way, by the time the Brontes are coming, these Gothic novels were already being parodied. They thought it was, gosh, this is so old school. But there's been a recent resurgence in interest amongst literary scholars in these Gothic novels. So the timing is really good. By the way, and if we get students, undergraduates interested in Gothic literature, not goth, but Gothic literature, that's going to drive CRT out organically because it's much more exciting, fascinating, and reality-based than CRT ever could be. CRT is the product of the advertising agencies and MTV and The View and CNN and the rest. But if we start reading this independently, I think we are going to regain our footing. Not that we're going to ascribe or join the Gothic vision, but we'll see where it came from and why we should not fall into that trap if we want to survive as a species, right? So, but anyway, the point is that Flowers in the Attic was the first piece of fiction, popular or elite fiction, where incest was the armature around which the whole story was wrapped. It was the premise of the book itself. And again, most of you know more about the Dollenganger family, the whole saga, than I ever will. I will say I learned something from Andrew Niederman, and that he said that he's speculating, and a lot of this is speculative, because V.C. Andrews, whoever she or he or it was, kept a very tight control over the real skinny on what that was all about. But he mentions that Dollenganger might have been a combination of doll. V.C. Andrews, by the way, was into dolls, China dolls. She was a girly girl type adult, even in middle age. By the way, she was 55 years old by the time she became a best-selling author. Isn't that kind of late? Doesn't that raise some sort of suspicion in you? It certainly did to me, especially since she wrote many, many short stories, none of them ever accepted for publication. She wrote, I think, 8 or 9. I'll have to go back to the book here. He has the exact number of novels that were submitted that were never accepted. So she was a failure. See that theme again? You've got mediocrity. You got Robert Rodriguez making a movie on he wrote a book on it, which I read, on $1,000 on your credit cards. And you have all these filmmakers, these artists who come from wealthy families who become famous, like Leonard Cohen. Someone in the comments, oh yeah, Leonard Cohen, the Canadian dude. You find, or Anthony Bourdain. I gave a talk on that. Joan Rivers, Warburg, right? Although Joan Rivers was incredibly talented, which probably led to her early demise. She could have passed for 70. She didn't look a day over 70, but she was much older than that. That's why I'm saying that, because some people say, well, she was such an old lady anyway. She just died of a natural death. No, I don't think so. So you know about the Dollenganger combination of Doll and Doppelganger, which in German is that double. And as legend goes, you see a double of yourself right before you die, right? So that's a bad omen or bad scene. That's so Dollenganger, Doppelganger. And don't think that V.C. Andrews was not sophisticated, or whoever was behind her, were not sophisticated enough to play mind games with us, these verbal mind games. That's what literature is about anyway, isn't it? I mean, good, bad, or indifferent, literature is about altering your perspective, your consciousness, affecting you, getting us on a visceral as well as intellectual level. That's Flowers in the Attic has it all, published in 1979. So we've already covered the fact that she was a failure as a writer. I didn't know this before until reading the Niederman book, but her mother, who I think also was a witch, remember I've put out the conjecture for you to follow up on, that she is an intergenerational witch. She's one of the witches of Eastwick, right? And by the way, I'm mentioning witches of Eastwick purposely because I said, hey, there's a pattern here. After Flowers in the Attic, there were all these succession of witch books, right? Which I'll get to in a moment. Hopefully I can touch upon it before this session ends. But she's a failed writer. Her mother moved her around the country, even as far west as New Mexico, before she wound up back in Virginia Beach. And we know from previous talks here that Virginia Beach is a militarized town. It's a resort town, yes, but that's where I think the U.S. Marines has a very strong presence. There's a lot of U.S. Marine Corps homoeroticism, for what I understand, right? Put it in the comments here. Who's the woman who did like 8 hours, 10 hours worth of revelation about her husband, who was a gay Marine, who did all kinds of crazy intelligence work? I don't want to give the wrong word. Kay Grigsby. Yes, it came back to me. This is improvised. I might forget the chord progression every once in a while. I might have to vamp until ready to get back into the flow. You dig? So yeah, Kay Grigsby. I think she's talking about Virginia Beach, where V.C. Andrews was finally settled. I don't know if her mother was doing it. I think the whole family was taken there and settled. Says, okay, you're a failed writer. We got you just where we want you. You're all bound up. You were in a full body cast. I mean, it might have gone to the days when she was a teenager when she was put in a full body cast. It's even in the book stating that the family, the mother in particular, felt guilty for doing it because they realized that it crippled her even further. So instead of feeding her gender bending hormones, maybe they just physically immobilized her so that they could create something called this is speculation, of course, if you haven't guessed. So they could create, the alphabet people can create something called a VC Andrews. They had her over a barrel. They had her in a barrel, right? They had her literally immobilized. And by the way, I don't think someone at that level of mobility is going to be able to pump up such a succession of literature and at that pace, because it is a physically, and I'm a writer, I'm a published writer many times over, and I don't write fiction. I have to research stuff before I set it to print. I'm not saying fiction is any easier to write, but you can pound that. You can pound out 5 pages a day without having to crack open a reference book or a citation, right? But that's something to keep in the background when we're doing our research. And I want you to spearhead it. I have enough projects on the stove, right on the burn there, along with the bean soup that I have on a slow burn. That's going to be my dinner tonight, cooked from scratch. Yeah, I'm looking forward to that. So, and I mentioned this because VC Andrews, despite her debility, was supposedly she was a good cook and she enjoyed good food. And she had enjoyed going to, when she became a celebrity, she enjoyed going to receptions and being wined and dined by the Hollywood elite who are throwing money at her so that they can make adaptations of her book. She dug it. But we were taught that she was paralyzed, according to early People magazine, that she was paralyzed. Nothing wrong with that, but the story was that she had no feeling or sensation below the neck. And I mention that because I'm thinking, because that's what I had been led to believe. I'm thinking, and this is before she got to experience sex, I think. She was, I think, 14, 15 years old, junior high school, before they went through this really invasive surgery that resulted in her being in a full body. But I don't think she experienced the sex act. And that's one of the reasons why that repression comes out in the literature. It breathes through breathes through every single pore of the pages as you're reading it. And I think it goes beyond the printed page. I think the energies are there. The sexual kundalini, repressed sexual energy is coming out at us. And it's being directed specifically to prepubescent girls or early adults who feel this frisson of emergent sexual power and energies, right? Am I bugging here? No, I don't think so. I just came with a German, published in Germany. It's already been translated into 15 languages. I don't have it with me right here. Oh yes, I do. Here it is. Just very quickly. You don't have to write this. It's by Daniel Klein. It's Someday We'll Tell Each Other Everything, and it's not about incest, but it's about intergenerational sexuality. Shortly after the fall of the Berlin Wall, so they bring in, because this is all very political. It may seem like, it's getting you all excited and wet and energized and turned on by reading Flowers. And that's not me, by the way. I'm reading it from analytically, but apparently the audience has a visceral and lower reaction to the whole V.C. Andrews canon, if you want to call it. But this book, written in German language, was about the reunification of East and West Germany. Just like there's some politics in V.C. Andrews. I'm talking about the politics of incestuous political power, a la Joe Biden as an obvious, Hunter Biden as an obvious, and probably Joe Biden, I don't know, as an obvious example. Probably Barack Obama. All of those people who are in those positions have had some sort of sexual trauma imposed on them because that's how you get into this club. You know that already, so I don't have to really go over that. So let's go into the Niederman explanation. It says timing. I was going to read you more, but let me just restrict myself to one paragraph because I'm running out of time. This is Niederman. It says timing is everything. A novel that includes incest would certainly not be banned as widely today. But Virginia was clearly not driven by considerations of what was or wasn't offensive. From all she wrote and said about it, we can see she was determined to be true to her story and characters. In author speak, she was not writing for any market, but she was not oblivious to what went on in the world around her. She was a voracious reader herself, but less of contemporary fiction and more of the classics. I'm sure she was steeped in the Gothics tradition of English and earlier American literature, and I'm sure she was reading contemporaries like Grace Metalius, Peyton Place, which was published in 1957. I'm sure she went through that. And I'm sure she knew about Sylvia Plath and her sexual, and she was also brought into the occult through her husband, who was the British poet laureate Ted Hughes. He was an occultist as well. These are all signs that I think that V.C. Andrews was herself a transgenerational witch, right? Who else? The woman that wrote The Haunting of Hill House, Shirley Jackson, also an occultist, also, which I'm sure V.C. Andrews wrote about. Niederman doesn't mention any of those people. So I didn't expect much, right? Niederman himself might be a fake because he obviously doesn't understand literary history. And his insights are very, very weak, very tepid. Of course, that leaves more room for you and myself. I'm sure most people in the chat room could come up with a much more profound understanding of what V.C. Andrews represents than the person who took over from her. And that's another conference. Maybe we'll have that tomorrow. Niederman, why do they have this guy, this middle-aged guy? He was already middle-aged. Went to take, and he's written like 80 so-called V.C. Andrews books after that. Is that cool, or is it? Someone said it was unethical. I'm saying it just doesn't ring true when you have a different mentality, a different conscience, different affect come in to take over another person's series, whoever V.C. Andrews was. And we'll talk about it tomorrow if you want. And this is a good opportunity, because I forgot to at the outset, to invite you to the Patreon live chat tomorrow. It's 12 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. It's going to be live with all my good Patreon supporters that allow me to buy books. This one's already falling apart. I'm going to have to return it. Buy the books and the movies, because I watched all the Lifetime adaptations of the V.C. Andrews and Lifetime. I watched Escaping R. Kelly, which was a Lifetime production as well. So anyway, the point that Niederman does make, or V.C. Andrews makes, is that, and V.C. Andrews expresses surprise. She says, "Oh, it just so happens that when my book came out in I don't know what her voice really sounds like. My book came out in 1979. It just so happens that there was all of a sudden an interest in incest and sexual abuse." Well, you know what? There's very little in life that happens that are accident, especially at the corporate level when you're producing and engineering a bestseller and rolling out this book series to the tune. I think within 3 years, there were already 3 million copies sold. And as I told you before, as of now, there's about 100 million V.C. Andrews titles sold, I think just in the US alone, right? And the publisher probably lowballing it. It's probably much larger than that. I didn't get a chance to talk about the Kinsey report. I'm sure since V.C. Andrews herself was a voracious reader of all kinds of material, not just fiction, but she read a lot of nonfiction, a lot of biography. By the way, she also interviewed her cousin that she had a very close relationship with, and I'm not going to impute any ignoble characteristics of that relationship, but that's how she got a lot of the juicy parts about this budding adolescent sexuality. Her niece was, 14 or 15, and she ask her niece about, well, what was it like to go on a date with this guy? Where did you go? Were you in a car? What did it feel? That type of stuff. Really kind of creepy. Well, maybe not. I mean, that's okay. 15-year-old girls or boys will talk like that. But your aunt who's 50 years old talking to your not, that's a little much, even if you're doing it under the guise of quote unquote research. So, was VC Andrews a multi-generational witch? I can't answer that question now. I'm posing it for you to be attuned to. Maybe you'll find some information out there, but I will say that I'm reading John Updike, right? I think I don't have it here with me. I dropped it, but I'm reading The Witches of Eastwick. That was John Updike, who is another literary creation. I'm saying he's talented, but he was being promoted by New York. He was being promoted by all the agents, right? The literary agents, the establishment. They all come from elite families. These are all trust fund babies, and it's dominated by women of trust fund babies. That's why you or me will or have never gotten a contract from them, because we have no use for them. That's why I'm on TubeU with 8,000 subscribers. I should have 800 million subscribers. I should be a best-selling author with all the depth of my analysis and my insights. I should be out there, but I'm not, because I'm talking about the underground that really controls the literary world and even conspiracy literature. Most of the good stuff is independently published. You notice that? And it's not coming from Random House, right? Annie Jacobson would not have a career unless she had the backing of this publishing establishment, whoever Annie Jacobson is. She is another VC Andrews synthetic face that's put out there in order to slow release, right? Who pioneered the slow release capsule in pharmaceuticals? Yes, it was the steaming Sacklers family that did that. Time release OxyContin. Well, you can use the time release concept for poison gas. This is warfare. You can also use the time release concept for cultural warfare or mind warfare, right? Is it called Krieg's War? Mind War, yeah. And that's what this represents. So you got John Updike, who's part of that cabal. By the way, I'm mentioning this with such bitterness because I wanted to be a novelist. I would read Esquire magazine I had a subscription when I was a teenager, reading it. Yeah, Hemingway, Fitzgerald. Yeah. I didn't realize that most of the people were brought up into that system. That doesn't mean I couldn't be a writer. That doesn't mean I couldn't create. That doesn't mean I couldn't play music. Right? Because I was not Bobby Dylan and picked out of obscurity by John Hammond, who's a Vanderbilt with Columbia Records. I could still do that. You could still that. You can still think. You can still do. Right? I don't have to be in the military to understand the martial mindset and have the martial skills. I don't have to be in the Army. I don't have to be in the Marines. I don't have to be in the Navy. All right? I could do that on my own. You can do that on your own. You don't even have to be in college, the university. You don't even have to be in the system to take all their concoctions produced by the steaming Sacklers of feces family, right? Or worse. And there's some worse than them, by the way, which we'll get to in another time. So you got Witches of Eastwood, which was later made into a film, and all our great PC actresses, not coincidentally, are featured in the film version, 1987, just 3 years later. How convenient, right? Just 3. That takes a long time usually to get a movie going. But 3 years later, there was a movie, Witches of Eastwick, starring our favorite PC loudmouths, Cher Sarkeesian, Susan Sarandon, or Sarandon, I call her, Michelle Pfeiffer, or Michelle Pfeiffer. Yes, you bet. Michelle Pfeiffer seems to be pretty cool, but Cher, shut up. Susan Sarandon, since you left the other dude, you've been kind of quiet and muted now, but we don't really dig your politics. You're a lame West LA type loudmouth. Just shut up. You know nothing. You've never been east of the 405 freeway. Come on. You're a West Side liberal. Right. I know about you West Side Greens, you West Side leftists, and it's like New York. New York has a little tiny little place of self-satisfied, wealthy leftists, right? I'm ghetto, baby. I come from South Central. Yeah. Dig that, Susan Sarandon. And by the way, Michelle Pfeiffer's from Orange County, where I also live. So I think that's one of the reasons why she's not out there, because she has a lot to live down. She's from Garden Grove or something. We used to call it Garbage Grove, something like that. Of course, sometimes people try to compensate for the fact that they come from such lame neighborhoods, right? Nothing against Garbage Grove. Love it, right? Um, so you have, oh yeah, I watched the movie. I'm now reading the series. Apparently, there's a whole series of novels. I forgot the name of the author. You probably know more than her. It's called Practical Magic, 1998, starring again the usual suspects: Sandra Witch Bullock, Nicole Kidman Bullock, Stockard Witch Channing. She's more of a Broadway creature, but she's probably a witch as well. Diane, isn't she associated with Woody Allen, the Woodman? Diane Wiest. These were in Practical Magic. What was that about? It's about they could never get married to men because all their men would die all of a sudden. And there's a whole series. I'm going to start reading them books. I have a couple of the first, the second, whatnot, just to get into their headspace and find out what's going on. All right, that's my time. I didn't even scratch the surface, baby. But ladies, and the few gentlemen that are here, remember, you're invested in the struggle too. Read some of that chick lit, right? Watch some of these chick flicks. That's what they call them, chick flicks, right? Because that's where all the action is, right? It's not going to get you a date. I don't mean by that, but I'm talking about that's where all the cultural social engineering is coming from. And that's why you don't have any testosterone left. You have LSD, low sex drive, right? And that's why the younger men don't have any sex drive at all. And then, if anything, they have male sexual attraction. That's it, and beyond. And uh, they're working towards, they have zero sexual attraction to anybody, let alone same sex. Okay, so this is a really a struggle for free humanity. And who would have thought little old kindly witch VC Andrews was behind it all? Only Professor Hamamoto of Cultural Forensics, with his addled, overactive imagination. Yeah, that's right. All right. Please watch this on rebroadcast. You'll understand it a little bit better. For those of you coming late, it's a cold open, right? It's a cold open, and you'll understand what I mean by the necessity of getting our political testosterone back. And right now we're using the blunt-headed, side of the sword, but there's also the sharp side. We don't want to go there, but there's the sharp and there's the blunt. We'll start out with the blunt. And if I'm sounding cryptic, you got to watch the beginning, the cold open. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. That's our time. Yes, Angelica Witch Houston from that satanic Houston line, starting with John and the father as well, Walter Houston. All right, ladies and gentlemen, that's my time. Thank you very much for your kind attention. Bye for now.